Hello, I'm Kamla. My guests today are filmmakers Betsy West and Julie Cohen. They are the producers of a new documentary called RBG, which is on Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Here's a clip from the film, and then our interview with Julie Cohen and Betsy West.
I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks.
We welcome today Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Welcome to San Francisco.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations on your documentary, RBG. Did you want to name it as Notorious RBG initially?
No, we always thought that RBG, which she has kind of embraced, that's how she signs her letters. We thought this was the perfect title.
Who came up with that? What do you call the collar that she wears?
A jabot.
A jabot.
Well, actually, Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first woman in the Supreme Court, when she got there, she started to wear these lace collars, and then Justice Ginsburg has taken it to a whole new level. She collects them, people send them to her, she's very proud of them. She showed us some of her collars you see in the film, opened up her closet, and she has a special collar for when she's writing in the majority, when she's writing an opinion, and she has one for when she is writing a dissent.
It's a way to turn that very male black robe to give it, as she says, a little bit of a feminine touch and add a little bit of style and pizzazz, and she really does that.
Which color does she wear for what?
Well, she has a gold collar that she wears when she is going to be reading a majority opinion. And she has a somewhat more severe kind of black
and silver
spiky
column.
thing.
Yeah, that's a dissent color.
Yeah.
It does seem like it has a dissent vibe to it.
Yeah. It's like,
So my question was, you chose that for your poster, didn't you? The collar.
yes. I mean, she wears these collars, and so yes, the artists who did the poster chose one. I don't know if he modeled it necessarily.
Yeah, it's sort of a
on one
composite
hers.
collar.
It's
but
kind of
she's been known for the collars, so he came up with a lovely lace collar look.
Okay, before we go and talk about your film, we have seen both of your works on various TV channels, CBS, ABC, NBC. How did you both get a start in the world of TV?
I came out of college and started working in the news business. I just loved being first a radio reporter and then a producer, and started to work my way up through ABC News as a producer, working at Nightline and
Ted Koppel.
with Ted Koppel in the 1980s. Eventually, after a stint as an executive at CBS, I became a professor at Columbia Journalism School, but started working on documentary projects.
Okay, you mentioned ABC. So I grew up watching Peter Jennings, Dan Sawyer, Barbara Walters. What was it like for you to work with them?
Well, they are, all of them, extraordinary journalists, and I learned so much. But as a producer, you have a different role. They are the presenters. They are out there and they're really on the line. There's so much pressure.
But you have to bring the stories and get to them.
You have to bring the stories to them, and you're doing everything to enable them to be on camera and to connect with an audience. And that's what makes all of them, whether Peter Jennings or Diane Sawyer, it's what makes them effective communicators. They're very good at relating to people. So it's a different role when you are a producer and helping a correspondent present the news, as opposed to, let's say, working on your own documentary, which is a different skill.
Before going to your teaching experience, what about your TV experience? How did you get started, Julie?
Yes, separately, but actually I had a fairly similar start. I started out as an on-air radio reporter after graduating from the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism. Started out on-air radio and moved into being a television news producer. Once I had the experience of putting together a story that had pictures go with it, I could never go back to radio. The visuals are so powerful, and the magic that you can create by combining the right soundbite with the right piece of video just was something that I loved, and moved into being a network television producer, also working with the on-air talent and helping put together, crafting stories, mostly Dateline NBC hour-long, crime was one of my kind of main areas, as well as some breaking news material, and I have a master's degree in law as well, so I did some stories. I had a fair amount of legal background both at NBC and at Court TV.
And Court TV, how did that come about?
It was when I was working as a radio reporter that I covered a wide variety of whatever was the news of the day, and as part of that, I was in New York City. I was sent to cover several trials, which gave you the experience to really get into the substance of a case and go to the same story day after day and really learn what was going on in the courtroom. I found that such engaging subject matter that when Court TV was starting in the early 90s, I just wrote a cold letter to the head of it and said, I want to work at this network. I love covering trials. That's like my thing. Please give me a job at your startup TV network. Maybe the world has changed a fair amount. I knew no one.
I don't think so.
They called me up. I came in for an interview, and I just had a very specific thing in mind. I want to cover trials. That's what you guys are doing. Let me come to your network.
So you found your passion.
I found my passion.
And both of you found your passion in making this documentary on Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When was the first time you guys heard her name?
Well, I really learned about Justice Ginsburg. I think I maybe had heard her name when she was confirmed as a Supreme Court Justice
under Bill Clinton
in 1993. But I really learned her full story when I was working on a project about the modern women's movement called Makers, for which
you produced,
which I was the executive producer of, and was producing many of the interviews of groundbreaking women across different areas. And I think it was Gloria Steinem, who was working with us on this project, who said, you have to do Ruth Bader Ginsburg because she is the legal architect of the women's movement. I really didn't know that much about Justice Ginsburg's history, and then did the research and discovered that, lo and behold, she had in the 1980s systematically brought a series of suits to the Supreme Court and argued those cases that brought women into coverage by our U.S. Constitution. There were hundreds, thousands of laws that discriminated against women under the guise of protecting them. But in fact, they were totally discriminatory. Nobody saw it that way except for women, and especially Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's when I learned about her. I interviewed her then in 2011 for the Makers Project. And then Julie actually was working with me on the Makers Project, interviewing some other women. We talked about Justice Ginsburg at the time. I think she saw the interview, and we just talked about what an unusual person she was. And then Julie went on to interview her for her documentary 2 years later.
Right.
Which is on the lavender scare?
In 2013, I interviewed Justice Ginsburg for a film called The Sturgeon Queens, about a Lower East Side smoked fish store, of which the Justice happens to be a huge fan. I actually had been working at Court TV during her Supreme Court nomination, so I was fairly aware of her elevation to the court, but didn't really learn her full history and her story from the 70s, which is so extraordinary but isn't widely known, until I saw the interview that Betsy had done with her for Makers. Having the experience of each of us having interviewed her, that just led us to a number of conversations about the Justice and what a cool and unusual woman she was. And so subsequently, when she became, the notorious RBG, this big rock star among millennial women, it just led us to think, wait a second, there's this amazing story. People love her, but they don't know the full story. Someone should make a documentary about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and why not have it be us?
So isn't it ironic? Here is a lady who has been working tirelessly since the 70s, since she graduated from law school. And she was influenced by Martin Luther King's fight for, the rights for the black minorities, that it took a 21st century blogger to discover her and kind of brand her in a 21st century way by calling her the notorious RBG. How ironic do you think that is? Because both of you kind of grew up with her because while you were working in TVs, she was doing her work. Why do you think that's the case, that it's taken so long? She's in her 80s.
Yeah, I think that within the women's movement, people knew who Ruth Bader Ginsburg was, and that she would have held a place in history, even if she hadn't become a Supreme Court justice, for the cases that she argued. However, she is a kind of shy and recessive person. I mean, she's not Gloria Steinem out there, marching on the front lines. She's doing this work in a very careful way, systematic way, and she's just not the most vocal person tooting her own horn.
So I culled out something that came from, she has, I think, spoken about it, a New York Times opinion piece, I think the lady who started the RBG, notorious RBG blog. So Justice Ginsburg says, fight for the things that you care, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. So I think she's like slow and steady kind of a person, and I think that's what your documentary highlights.
Yeah, absolutely. That is her philosophy. She, as her granddaughter says, wants to bring people to her table. She wants to find consensus on the Supreme Court when she can. As she says, she will speak in dissent if she has to, but she would really like to convince people. And her way of working is very deliberate and strategic. When she was arguing cases in the 1970s, she was looking for cases that she knew would appeal to 9 male justices who really didn't understand that discrimination against women existed. They just didn't even think that it was a thing. And so she had to very slowly educate them as if they were kindergarten.
And they all listened.
Children. And they listened to her because it was sort of the first time that someone was explaining to them in a way that they could understand that this discrimination existed, that it hurt women, that it hurt men, that it was harmful for our society, and it was unconstitutional. And eventually she brought them along to understand that.
The documentary is not based on her book, but it is research that the two of you did, and then you got stuff sent from the contributors of her book. They sent you photos of her as a kid and things like that.
Well, one of the, yes, we did a fair amount of research. We also, quite a bit of what is in the My Own Words book that Justice Ginsburg and her 2 biographers from Georgetown University, Mary Hartnett and Wendy Williams, part of what's, a lot of what's in that is just transcripts of just the amazing talks that she's given around the country to law students, to legal groups, to civic organizations of all stripes. And we spent quite a bit of time, about a year, following her around to a number of these talks and recording the conversations that she had with people in those environments. So we had those elements of her story. Of course, for a film, you're really looking for those gems of archival video, and we really got those when her biographers told us of the existence from Justice Ginsburg's late husband's family of home movies of Ruth Ginsburg and Marty Ginsburg together in their 20s, traveling through Europe at Ruth Bader's Cornell graduation. Such extraordinary footage that hadn't been publicly seen before, and in fact had been in family archives for a while. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg hadn't seen these pictures for years and these movies for years, and was kind of thrilled when she saw them in our film.
So here's a clip with Justice Ginsburg and her husband, and then we'll come back and talk about the role her husband played in helping her.
I have had the great good fortune to share life with a partner truly extraordinary for his generation,
He was the first boy I ever knew who cared that I had a brain.
So we just saw a clip of Justice Ginsburg and her husband. What can you tell us about the role her husband played? Clearly, he supported her. She looked out for him when he had cancer as a student, and he looked out for her and helped her strategically rise up the ladder.
I mean, it's an extraordinary feminist love story, and a very unusual
when you
love
say
story.
feminist, what do you mean?
Because Marty Ginsburg, who was a very accomplished lawyer in his own right, supported his wife from the very beginning. I mean, you know, he said to a friend when he first met her, you know, she's really beautiful and she's really smart. And he loved that. He wasn't threatened by that. When they got to Harvard, they were in Harvard Law School together, he's bragging, my wife is going to be on law review. And then early in their married life, when he was working in a law firm, she was taking more of the responsibilities of the family. But when she found her calling as a women's rights litigator and started bringing a series of cases before the Supreme Court in the 1970s, here she is, you know, arguing before the Supreme Court, that's a big deal. She still had children at home. And Marty Ginsburg stepped up and took up more of the responsibilities, and actually he and the kids pushed her out of the kitchen. She wasn't a very good cook anyway. He started doing more of the cooking. Then when she became a federal judge in 1980, he gave up his job in New York and moved with her to Washington. Most importantly, when an opening came up on the Supreme Court and President Clinton was going to be considering nominees, Marty Ginsburg, who was a very charming, gregarious guy with a lot of friends, made sure that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was considered for that opening.
So he championed for her.
He championed, he lobbied. And she has said, she's given him credit. She said, look, my name would have been on a list, but Marty made sure that I got to the top of the list in terms of getting a hearing with President Clinton for that opening.
As a friend of hers told us, Marty Ginsburg just thought it would be an outrage for his wife not to be a Supreme Court justice. He just knew how smart she was, knew what she accomplished, understood the path that she had been on for decades, and wanted to see it happen both for her and for the country. And he was going to push to help make that happen.
What did you two walk away with when you watched the two of them support and help each other? What is it that we can learn from their marriage and their collaboration, where it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they are great role models. They kidded each other. You see how, you know, what the relationship was like. They obviously loved each other very much and supported each other. There's a lot of teasing going on in the family about her cooking, about various things that I think is so much fun. They just seem to enjoy each other so
But
much.
how have you changed? Has it inspired you in any way? Has it got you thinking? Because it certainly got me thinking, because my husband helps me quite a bit.
Absolutely. And actually, you know, Betsy and I both have husbands who are supportive of our careers. And if you read closely through the credits, you will see that we gave them a special credit that we call the Martin Ginsburg Award for supportive husbanding, for their, you know, supporting us through the kind of complicated process of making a film and maybe not being around to do all the wifely, all the domestic things that you might do. And frankly, for seeing the film as an endeavor they were involved in, also watching cuts of it, making suggestions. I mean, Betsy's husband is a documentary filmmaker. My husband is a longtime print journalist, so they participated substantively. And
they were very helpful to us. Both with the substance and also just being there throughout the process.
How did you get Justice Ginsburg to say yes? Because initially she said, no, not now.
She didn't say no. She said not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Not yet. And then I think we just slowly convinced her of the seriousness of our intent, that we wanted to interview. We wanted to tell her whole story, not just concentrate necessarily.
Did she interview guys? Did she do an interview with the two of you to find out?
No. She
just trusted you.
Yeah, she knew who we were because we had both interviewed her before, and really it was all done through email traffic. And the second approach that we made to her, we gave her a list of some of the people we intended to interview, which gave her a sense of how serious this was. It was going to go through her career. And at that point, she said, well, I'm not ready to talk to you for a couple of years, which seemed like a long time away. But if you're going to be talking to people you might want to consider, and then gave us 3 more names of people she thought could give insight into her life and career.
Who are those?
It was
Harry
Edwards, a friend of hers when they were both federal judges together, Kathleen Paratis, who she worked with at the ACLU Women's Rights Project, and Arya Nair, who had actually hired her at the Women's Rights Project. So all people, you know, who were important in her career, who we did interview, and who turned out to be fantastic interviews. So we joke that she's a pretty good documentary producer as well as a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, when she was making suggestions to us, even though she was saying it was going to be 2 years before we could interview her, we thought, okay, she's involved here, and that was the opening of the door that led us to really try to make this movie.
How easy was it for you to get her to say yes for her super diva gym sessions?
Well, that
came later in the process.
That came later. We always knew because she's talked about her workout and had become,
Since 1999, huh?
Yes. And it's become somewhat legendary, but we knew we really wanted to film it. But we waited until we had been filming for, about 9 months, interviewing people, following her around. We asked to meet with her in her office for really the only sit down we had to discuss this without cameras. And we, talked about what we had been doing. And then we said we had a list of things we would like to film, situations we would like to film in her office working, at home working, a scene with her family, which turned out to be with Clara, her granddaughter.
Something on vacation.
Something on vacation. And then I, as Julie will say, I just was so nervous. I just very softly said to her, and could we film you doing your workout? Just about in that tone of very meek voice. And there was a pause, and she said, yes, I think that would be possible.
You're a good study of people. You knew that speaking in quiet tones would get her attention.
I think it wasn't deliberate. It was fear. I was just so nervous to ask it. And then there we were a couple of months later, and Julie can describe the scene. It was incredible.
We had 2 cameras in the small gym, as well as her and her personal trainer, and an audio person also. We didn't really need to be in the room, but there was no way that Betsy and I were going to miss the moment to see her exercising, so we sort of crouched in a corner and watched with increasingly widening eyes as she went through the paces of an exercise routine that was beyond anything that we could do, like everything she had talked about, which we didn't, like planks and side planks and weightlifting and 20 push-ups that aren't girl push-ups but really on her feet. Like, we just had thought it was legendary but apocryphal, and it turned out, nope, there she is doing that exercise routine.
That was an amazing segment of the documentary. Even I had read, but when I saw it, I'm like, really? She's 85 and she's doing this?
It is extraordinary. And, initially we were surprised that she said yes, you could film that. Once we got in there, I think we realized why she said yes. She is taking care of herself. She's proud of the fact that she's taking care of herself. And I think she's not just an icon for the millennial generation. I think for aging women, she's also a role model, and both of us have started to
more serious
workout as a result of being inspired by Justice Ginsburg.
I'm sure she'd be very happy to hear
yes.
that. One of the things that I didn't see in the film, maybe I missed it, is Justice Ginsburg's famous statement that she made in her book, in every good marriage, it helps sometimes to be a little deaf. something that her mother-in-law gave her as advice on her wedding day, I believe.
Absolutely.
You didn't include that, did you?
It's not in our film. I'll say we had a segment where she was giving her mother's advice about it's not good to get consumed by useless emotions like anger, and I guess we wanted to keep it a little narrow in terms of the parental and mother-in-law advice. Like we sort of decided we have to choose one, and we chose the anger, but. Sometimes it helps to be a little deaf is a great piece of advice, and we recommend it.
Yes.
Did you include the piece on Vladimir Nabokov being her...
We did not. She did. She's known to be an excellent writer, a very clear, forceful writer, and she credits that to one of her professors at Cornell, the legendary writer Nabokov.
Okay. And who is the gentleman, the Sikh gentleman that I saw when she went to the opera?
Yes, she goes on family vacations to opera festivals. That is, Justice Ginsburg loves the arts, loves opera. That's where they spend their family vacations. Her son married a woman who had been previously married to a Sikh gentleman, and she has two sons who are Justice Ginsburg's grandsons,
right?
Grandsons.
And Satnam, Justice Ginsburg's grandson, lived in D.C. for a while. He's now a law student here in California. But they have quite a close bond. He's also a lover of culture and the arts, so he's often one to accompany her to the theater, to the opera, to classical music of all kinds.
Because her son has a record company, a classical.
Yes, he has a classical music company.
Okay. My final question. One of your bucket lists is finished, Sundance.
It is.
What else is there in your bucket list?
Well,
I'm going to say having our movie appear in theaters for commercial audiences outside of the...
That's going to
festival.
happen. That's going to happen.
But that doesn't count as a bucket list.
No.
pretty
We
exciting.
actually want to see the trailer for our own movie. We haven't seen it yet. That seems more exciting to us than we've seen the trailer, of course, but seeing it in a theater.
In theater. I was saying we haven't had time to go to the movies
Right,
lately,
we
and
just
I
wanna go to
really
movies
want to
and see our own trailer.
in a movie theater and see the trailer. That will be
the dream.
good. I mean, look, we'd love to do another film, but we're very busy now working on this and thinking about what might be future projects. We had a great time working on this, and maybe we'll do another.
Well, wish you all the best, Julie and Betsy, and thank you so much for doing the interview.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you.
And thank you for watching. If you missed any of our shows, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. We'll be back again next week with another new conversation. Until then, goodbye.